Welcome, dear listeners, to a journey through time, where the human heart transcends social barriers and true love flourishes even in the most arid terrain of aristocracy. Today we will meet Rosa Benedeti, a young horse trainer who, even while carrying the pain of loss, will find in the strength of her gentle soul the power to transform not only wild horses, but also a princely heart wounded by the shadows of the past. Amidst the perfumed gardens of Naples and the golden halls of palaces, we will witness how two wounded souls meet and discover that true love knows no differences of birth, only the purity of feelings that make us truly human. Before we begin, I would like to know, where are you joining us from on this journey? Leave your city in the comments, as stories like this connect us across borders and time. And if this narrative touches your heart as we hope, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Each gesture encourages us to continue bringing these literary pearls that nourish the soul. Year 1824, Naples, Italy. The almond blossoms painted white the gardens of the Palace of Capodimonte, whispering promises of a spring that, for some hearts, was still slow to arrive. The silence that dwelt in Rosa Benedetti's chest was deeper than the mourning of Neapolitan widows. 3 days had passed since Julia, her 12-year-old sister, had closed her eyes for the last time, taken by the fever that plagued the poor neighborhoods like an implacable ghost. Rosa walked through the irregular stones of Naples' streets without destination, her bare feet already numb to the morning cold. The black shawl that covered her wavy brown hair contrasted with the pallor of her skin, marked by sleepless nights beside her sister's bed. At 19, she knew the silent language of horses better than that of men. She had grown up in Count Alberti's stables, where she learned that the pain of animals mirrored that of humans. Both needed patience and gentleness to be healed. The crowd involuntarily dragged her toward the gardens of the Palace of Capodimonte. The commotion increased as they approached the Golden Gates, where horsemen prepared an equestrian exhibition. Rosa tried to resist the human current, but her body, weakened by fasting and sadness, yielded to the collective movement. When she finally managed to lean against a centuries-old tree, her eyes fixed on the improvised arena on the main lawn. Purebred horses gleamed under the morning sun, their hooves producing music that awakened in her a painful longing for the times when Julia accompanied her to the stables. The perfume of wisteria mingled with the aroma of damp earth and leather, creating an olfactory symphony that transported her to happier days. But happiness now seemed like a forbidden luxury, like the jewels that adorned the ladies of nobility. Rosa observed the horses with the gaze of one who recognized in each movement an untold story. There was sadness in those equine eyes, especially in a black stallion that stirred nervously in the restraints. Something in that animal called to her, as if they shared the same helplessness. Without realizing it, she approached the fence that separated the public from the arena, her hands closing on the cold iron bars. The wind brought her whispers of admiration and expectation from the spectators, but Rosa heard only the accelerated heartbeat of the black horse. What she didn't know was that, at that exact moment, princely eyes were also observing the arena. Not the horses, but the young woman in the black shawl whose presence radiated a melancholy that echoed his own. And so, without either of them knowing, destiny began to weave the first threads of a tapestry that would change their lives forever. Prince Francesco Monteverde contemplated the exhibition from the balcony of his private quarters on the 3rd floor of the Palace of Capodimonte. His long, pale fingers drummed nervously on the marble balustrade in a silent melody that accompanied the irregular rhythm of his breathing. At 25, Francesco carried on his shoulders a weight that curved his naturally proud posture. 3 years had passed since the death of Pietro, his younger brother, in an accident that still visited his dreams like a recurring nightmare. Pietro had tried to tame Tuono, the black stallion that now stirred in the arena, in an imprudent demonstration of courage that cost him his life. Since then, Francesco had not ridden in public. The horses, which before were his passion, had become symbols of a guilt that gnawed at his soul like acid. He blamed himself for allowing Pietro, at 18, to face an animal known for its ferocity. The morning breeze brought him the echo of laughter from the guests in the garden, a sound that rang hollow to him, empty like his existence. Francesco moved away from the balcony and headed to the Venetian mirror that dominated a wall of his quarters. The reflection that stared back had the same blue eyes as Pietro, but carried a sadness that his brother had never known. His dark hair, always impeccably combed, framed a face of aristocratic features that the court ladies admired from a distance. But Francesco had built around himself invisible walls that kept everyone at a safe distance from his wounded heart. The coat of arms of the Monteverde family, embroidered on his navy blue silk vest, weighed on his chest like a chain. All that pomp and circumstance seemed futile to him when compared to Pietro's absence in the empty chair that remained untouched at the dinner table. A noise from the arena made Francesco return to the balcony. Down there, Tuono had broken free from the restraints and was galloping freely across the lawn, dispersing the crowd in panic. It was always like this. The horse seemed to carry the same revolt that inhabited Francesco's heart. But then, something unusual happened. A small dark figure did not flee like the others. The young woman in the black shawl slowly approached the enraged animal, her movements as smooth as the waves that kissed the Gulf of Naples. Francesco leaned over the balustrade, fascinated. He had never seen anyone besides Pietro dare to approach Tuono in that way. And even more impressive was the horse's reaction. His dilated nostrils gradually calmed, as if the presence of that woman brought some balm to his agitation. For a moment, Francesco felt his chest tighten with an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. If someone could calm Tuono, perhaps they could also bring peace to the ghosts that haunted him. Without realizing it, his hands gripped the balustrade with enough force to whiten his knuckles. For the first time in 3 years, something beyond guilt and sadness awakened interest in his heart. Time seemed to suspend itself when Rosa extended her hand toward Tuono. The black stallion, with his mane flowing like dark silk in the wind, gradually ceased his abrupt movements. His eyes, which before spat fire, met hers in an ancestral communication that transcended words. "Quiet, my beautiful one," whispered Rosa, her voice carrying the same soft melody she used to soothe Julia when fever tormented her. "I am lost too." The words flowed in Neapolitan dialect, in a cadence that seemed to lull not only the horse, but all nature around. The perfume of roses that adorned the gardens mingled with the musky aroma of the animal, creating a unique fragrance of that unrepeatable moment. Tuono lowered his majestic head, allowing Rosa's delicate fingers to touch his forehead. It was as if he recognized in her a sister soul, someone who understood the language of pain without need for explanations. The animal's tense muscles relaxed under the gentle touch, like violin strings loosening after a melancholic sonata. The crowd, which had dispersed in panic before, now watched open-mouthed at the silent miracle unfolding before their eyes. Murmurs of admiration began to rise like prayers in a cathedral, but Rosa heard only Tuono's gradually pacified breathing. High on the balcony, Francesco held his breath. His blue eyes, normally veiled by sadness, shone with an intensity he hadn't felt since childhood. Something in that scene touched a deep chord in his soul, as if witnessing not only the taming of a wild horse, but the possibility of his own redemption. "Benedetto!" he shouted to his personal servant, who remained in the shadows of the room. "Bring me that young woman immediately." The servant, a graying man named Marco who had served the family for decades, nodded and quickly headed to the stairs. Francesco returned to observing the scene in the garden, where Rosa still caressed Tuono with movements that seemed like silent dance. The morning sun created a golden halo around the pair, as if nature itself blessed that unlikely encounter. The leaves of the olive trees whispered in the wind an ancient song of hope, while the perfume of Neapolitan spring jasmines enveloped the moment in an almost mystical aura. Rosa felt a shiver run down her spine when she saw the servant in golden livery approaching. Instinctively she tried to move away from Tuono, but the horse whinnied softly, as if asking her not to abandon him. It was the first time in years that anyone had managed to establish such a connection with the animal. "My lady," said Marco with respectful reverence, "His Highness, Prince Francesco, requests your presence." Rosa felt the blood freeze in her veins. She, an orphan from the poor neighborhoods, being summoned by a prince. Her eyes sought the balcony from which the order had come, but she only glimpsed an elegant silhouette outlined against the silk curtains. Fear and curiosity fought a silent battle in her chest. Tuono, as if perceiving her hesitation, gently touched her shoulder with his muzzle, in a gesture she interpreted as encouragement. With her heart beating like the wings of a frightened dove, Rosa smoothed her black shawl and followed Marco up the marble stairs that led to the interior of the palace. She didn't know that those steps were leading her toward the greatest encounter of her life. Prince Francesco's quarters seemed like a sanctuary of aristocratic melancholy. Persian rugs in shades of blue and gold covered the marble floor, while velvet curtains framed windows that opened onto the Gulf of Naples. Portraits of ancestors observed from atop their golden frames, silent witnesses to generations of power and privilege. Rosa entered the room with hesitant steps, her eyes taking in the luxurious details she had never imagined existed. The contrast between her simplicity and the opulence around her was striking. She, with her mended brown wool dress and faded black shawl, seemed like a discordant note in an aristocratic symphony. Francesco observed her in silence for a moment. There was something in the young woman's posture that intrigued him. Despite her evident poverty, she maintained her head high with a natural dignity that many court ladies, despite all their education, did not possess. "Come closer," he said, his voice carrying a softer tone than he usually used with strangers. Rosa obeyed, stopping at a respectful distance. Her brown eyes, still moist with unshed tears from recent grief, met his in a silent exchange that lasted an eternity condensed into seconds. "How did you manage to calm Tuono?" Francesco asked, dispensing with formalities. There was genuine urgency in his voice, as if the answer were the key to a mystery that had tormented him for years. Rosa hesitated. Her hands, calloused from work with horses, closed nervously over her skirt. "Horses," she began, her voice soft as sea breeze. "They feel our pain, Your Highness. Tuono carries sadness as deep as—" She stopped, realizing it might be too bold to compare an animal's pain with what a prince might feel. "As deep as what?" Francesco insisted, taking a step toward her. "As deep as mine, Your Highness," whispered Rosa. "I lost my sister 3 days ago. Julia was all I had in the world." The confession hung in the air like incense perfume, laden with a sincerity that Francesco was not accustomed to hearing in palatial halls. It had been years since anyone spoke to him with such frankness about loss and pain. Instinctively, his hand went to his vest pocket, where he always kept a small locket with Pietro's portrait. The gesture did not go unnoticed by Rosa, who recognized in him the same movement that mourning women made when touching saints' medals. "I understand," murmured Francesco, his voice carrying a weight that Rosa perceived but did not fully comprehend. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was rather like two wounded souls recognizing each other mutually, without need for words to explain the inexplicable. The golden light of Neapolitan midday filtered through the curtains, creating luminous arabesques that danced on the walls like omens of hope. Francesco observed Rosa with renewed attention. She was beautiful, but not in the ostentatious way of court ladies. Her beauty resided in the serenity she emanated, in the way her eyes reflected both suffering and compassion. "Return tomorrow," he said finally. "Tuono will need your care." Rosa nodded silently, a respectful bow before heading to the door, but when she was about to leave, Francesco called her again. "What is your name?" "Rosa Benedeti, Your Highness." "Rosa," he repeated, and there was something in the way he pronounced her name that made her heart flutter like butterfly wings. "Rosa, like the spring flower." She left without responding, but carrying with her the sensation that something fundamental had changed in the universe. Francesco remained observing the door through which she had disappeared, feeling for the first time in years that perhaps spring could also come to the winter of his soul. The following morning brought with it a sky of translucent blue, where white clouds sailed like ships in the celestial Mediterranean. Rosa walked through the streets of Naples with firmer steps, carrying in her heart a curiosity that the sleepless night had not been able to extinguish. The stables of the Palace of Capodimonte exhaled the familiar aroma of fresh hay and well-treated leather. Rosa breathed deeply, feeling at home for the first time since Julia's death. Tuono awaited her in his stall, whinnying softly upon seeing her, as if she were an old friend. "Good morning, my black prince," she whispered, extending her hand for him to touch with his muzzle. "Did you also spend the night thinking about yesterday?" Francesco watched from the stable entrance, hidden in the shadows. He had arrived before even the first rays of sun, an inexplicable anxiety robbing him of sleep. Seeing her there, conversing with Tuono in an intimacy he himself had never managed to establish, provoked in him a mixture of admiration and a pang of something he dared not name. Rosa began to brush the horse's mane with rhythmic and hypnotic movements. Her fingers worked with the skill of one born for that task, while she hummed softly a Neapolitan melody that her mother had taught her in childhood. "He likes you," said Francesco, emerging from the shadows. Rosa startled, dropping the brush which fell with a dry noise on the stone floor. "Your Highness, I didn't see you arrive. I apologize for frightening you," he said, picking up the brush and handing it to her. His fingers briefly touched hers, an accidental touch that sent waves of warmth through Rosa's arms. Francesco remained beside her, observing how Tuono responded to her care. The horse, which with him always showed himself aloof and distrustful, relaxed under Rosa's caresses like a domesticated kitten. "You have a gift," murmured Francesco. "Tuono hasn't trusted anyone since—" He paused, the sentence hanging in the air like golden dust in the beam of light entering through the stable window. Rosa perceived the hesitation and without thinking asked softly, "Since when, Your Highness?" Francesco turned to her, his blue eyes carrying a vulnerability he rarely showed. For a moment, the social differences between them seemed to dissolve like salt in the sea. "Since my brother Pietro," he began but couldn't finish. At that instant the locket slipped from his pocket, falling open on the stone floor. The small portrait of a smiling young man was exposed between them, like a silent confession. Rosa crouched down and picked up the locket, observing for a moment the cheerful face in the portrait before returning it to Francesco. There was an undeniable resemblance between the two brothers, but where Pietro radiated joviality, Francesco carried the mark of loss. "He was very young," she said softly, without needing to ask what had happened. 18 years old, confirmed Francesco, holding the locket against his chest. "He died trying to mount Tuono. I allowed it." The confession emerged like spring water, spontaneous and crystalline. Rosa remained silent, instinctively understanding that this moment asked for her presence, not her words. "Julia also had that smile," she said finally, her voice carrying the same nostalgic melody of her song. "She laughed, even when fever consumed her. She said I worried too much." Francesco looked at her with surprise. It was rare for someone to share their pain instead of trying to console him with empty platitudes. "You blame yourself for not having saved your sister," he said, not as a question, but as recognition. "And you blame yourself for not having protected Pietro," responded Rosa, establishing between them a bridge of mutual understanding. Tuono whinnied softly, as if approving that exchange of truths. The sun rose in the Neapolitan sky, projecting shadows that shortened like the time that separated two wounded hearts from a possible cure. Francesco felt something inside him begin to thaw, like snow at the first kiss of spring sun. And Rosa, for the first time since Julia's death, felt that perhaps she was not completely alone in the world. The following weeks established a routine that became the silent refuge for both. Rosa arrived at the stables at dawn, when mist still rose from the gardens like bridal veils, and remained until midday, when the Neapolitan sun made the work too heavy for her delicate constitution. Francesco invented excuses to visit them during these hours. Sometimes he just observed in silence. Others he approached to talk about horses, about Naples, about everything except what really connected them, that shared pain that made them recognize in each other a mirror of their own soul. But not all flowers in Capodimonte's gardens exhaled sweet fragrance. In the penumbra of palatial corridors, where carpets muffled steps and curtains hid whispers, a conspiracy took shape. Duchess Elisabetta Torriani observed from her quarters window the morning encounter between Rosa and Francesco in the stables. Her green eyes, beautiful as emeralds but cold as winter ice, narrowed in an expression of calculated disdain. Elisabetta had been promised to Francesco since childhood, an arrangement between families that she had always considered her natural right. That the prince had never shown romantic interest in her was a detail she preferred to ignore, confident that time and social convenience would do their work. "It's unacceptable," she murmured to the Marquis of Castiglione, who remained by her side like a faithful shadow. A plebeian in the stables filling Francesco's head with this inappropriate intimacy. The Marquis, a middle-aged man whose ambition exceeded his morals, nodded gravely. His own interests were tied to the marriage between Elisabetta and Francesco, an arrangement that would guarantee him considerable influence at court. The situation must be resolved, he said, choosing his words carefully, before the prince lets himself be carried away by impulses inadequate to his position. Elisabetta smiled, but there was serpent coldness in that smile. "Let me handle this," she said. "A direct conversation with the girl can clarify her delicate position." On the afternoon of that Thursday, while Rosa walked through the narrow streets that led back to her humble lodging, an elegant carriage stopped beside her. The door opened, revealing Elisabetta in all her aristocratic magnificence. "Rosa Benedeti," said the Duchess, her voice melodious as a siren's song, but with something dangerous swimming in the depths. "Get in. We need to talk." Rosa hesitated. Something in the Duchess's tone and the way she pronounced her name, as if it were something unpleasant that needed to be spat out, made alarms sound in her intuition. "I am grateful for the offer, Your Excellence, but—" "It wasn't an invitation," interrupted Elisabetta, her mask of courtesy slipping momentarily. "It was an order." Rosa entered the carriage, feeling like a bird flying straight into a cage. The interior was luxurious beyond her imagination. Embroidered velvet seats, silk curtains, and a small silver crucifix swaying with the movement. "You are young," began Elisabetta, studying Rosa like an entomologist observes a rare insect, "and perhaps too innocent to understand certain realities of life at court." Rosa remained silent, her hands crossed in her lap in a posture that Julia had always admired for conveying dignity, even in simplicity. "Prince Francesco will be my husband," continued the Duchess, each word falling like a drop of poison. "It's an agreement between our families, sealed when we were children. Your presence in the stables is causing inappropriate comments." "I only take care of Tuono," said Rosa softly. "I do nothing inappropriate." "Your very existence there is inappropriate," replied Elisabetta, her voice gaining a cutting tone. "A plebeian should not spend so much time alone with a prince. People talk, and when people talk, reputations become stained." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Rosa felt the weight of social differences falling on her shoulders like an iron mantle. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally. The smile that Elisabetta sketched would have been beautiful if it weren't so cruel. "That you disappear," she said simply. "That you find another place to exercise your talents. Away from Francesco. Away from Capodimonte." The carriage stopped, and Rosa realized they had returned to the starting point. Elisabetta gestured for her to get out, but before she left, she grabbed her arm with surprising force. "Don't underestimate me, Rosa Benedetti," she whispered, her rose perfume barely masking the threat in her words. "I protect what is mine, and Francesco is mine." Rosa got out of the carriage with trembling legs, watching it move away in a cloud of dust, gilded by the setting sun. For the first time since she had begun frequenting the stables, she felt fear, not of Elisabetta, but of the possibility of losing the only place where, since Julia's death, she felt she still belonged somewhere in the world. May brought with it the full splendor of Neapolitan spring. Capodimonte's gardens exploded in colorful symphonies, crimson roses, white jasmines like stars, and purple wisteria that hung from pergolas like perfumed curtains. The air vibrated with the buzzing of bees and the melodious song of nightingales, creating a celestial soundtrack for the morning encounters between Rosa and Francesco. In the stables, Tuono's transformation was remarkable. The black stallion, once wild and irreducible, now accepted the saddle with Rosa, and even allowed Francesco to approach when she was present. It was as if the young woman possessed a magic key that opened not only the animal's heart, but also dissolved the barriers that Francesco had built around himself. That Thursday morning, Rosa found Francesco already in the stables, brushing Tuono with still hesitant movements. The prince had exchanged his formal clothes for simple riding pants and a white linen shirt that enhanced the natural elegance of his posture. "He's allowing it," said Francesco, amazed, when Rosa approached. "Yesterday I couldn't even touch him." Rosa smiled, the first genuine smile that Francesco had seen on her lips since they met. It was as if the sun were rising on her face, illuminating features that constant sadness kept in shadow. "Tuono feels when there's no fear in our heart," she explained, positioning herself beside Francesco. "He needed time to trust again." "And you?" asked Francesco softly, his blue eyes meeting her brown ones. "Do you trust again?" The question hung between them like flower perfume, laden with meanings that both perceived but dared not name. Rosa felt her cheeks blush with a pink tone that rivaled the peach tree flowers. "I'm learning," she whispered. Francesco gently guided Rosa's hand over Tuono's mane, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had the naturalness of ancient dance. The touch sent waves of warmth through both their arms, an awakening of sensations that had remained asleep for a long time. "Rosa," murmured Francesco, his voice hoarse with emotion, "you brought something back to me that I thought I had lost forever." "What?" she asked, although her heart already knew the answer. "The possibility of feeling that life can still be beautiful." The words flowed between them like golden honey, sweet and inevitable. Rosa leaned slightly toward Francesco, their bodies almost touching while they continued caressing Tuono. Her perfume, a mixture of simple soap and her natural aroma, intoxicated Francesco more than the finest wine. "Your Highness," she began, but Francesco gently interrupted her. "Francesco," he said. "When we're like this, just Francesco." "Francesco," she repeated, testing the name on her lips as if it were a precious prayer. Tuono whinnied softly, as if approving the moment, and moved away a few steps, leaving them alone in the golden circle of light entering through the stable window. Francesco turned completely to Rosa, his hands finding hers in a silent dance of approach. "I shouldn't feel this," he whispered, his forehead almost touching hers. "A prince and a poor orphan," completed Rosa, but without bitterness. It was simply the truth that separated them like an impassable abyss. "An extraordinary woman," corrected Francesco, his thumb gently caressing her face. "A woman who made me remember that my heart still beats." The kiss that followed was inevitable, as sunrise, soft as sea breeze, and deep as the roots of a centennial olive tree. Rosa felt herself melting in Francesco's arms, all her defenses dissolving like snow in Mediterranean summer. When they separated, both were breathing as if they had run through the Neapolitan hills. Francesco's eyes shone with an intensity that Rosa had never seen before, while she felt simultaneously elevated to the heavens and terrified by the implications of that moment. "This is madness," she whispered. "Then let it be our madness," responded Francesco, sealing the words with another kiss that promised impossible worlds and eternities stolen from time. Outside the stables, hidden behind a marble column, Elisabetta observed the scene with eyes that spit fire. Her hands closed into fists so tight that her nails left marks on her palms. War was declared, and Rosa Benedeti still didn't know against what force she had positioned herself. The days that followed the first kiss were like living in a golden dream, interwoven with threads of anxiety. Rosa floated through Naples' streets, with her heart singing silent melodies, but her nights were populated by nightmares where invisible forces tried to tear from her hands everything she had begun to love again. Francesco, in turn, found himself counting the hours until their morning encounters in the stables. For the first time in years, he woke with expectation instead of resignation, his quarters echoing with low whistles of ancient melodies he thought he had forgotten. But the clandestine paradise they had built began to show cracks when suspicious looks and malicious whispers began to follow them like shadows. The palace servants, formerly indifferent to Rosa's presence, now observed her with poorly disguised curiosity. The court ladies commented in closed groups, their voices falling silent abruptly when Francesco passed. It was a Thursday afternoon when Rosa walked back home through the Mercato di Porta Nolana, her steps echoing on the worn stones between the fish and vegetable stalls. The salty perfume of the sea mingled with the aromas of basil and ripe tomatoes, creating the olfactory symphony characteristic of Naples's popular neighborhoods. It was then that an elegantly dressed man emerged from a shadowy tavern, blocking her path. Rosa recognized him immediately. It was Salvatore Conti, one of the Marquess of Castiglione's men, known for solving delicate problems for the aristocracy. "Signorina Benedetti," he said, his voice oily as rancid oil. "What a coincidence to find you here." Rosa tried to go around him, but Salvatore moved to block her path again, his smile revealing teeth yellowed by smoke. "I have a message for you," he continued, removing from his pocket an envelope sealed with the Castilian coat of arms. "From people who are concerned about your well-being." "I don't want messages from anyone," said Rosa, her voice firm despite the tremor she felt in her legs. "Ah, but this one you'll want to read," insisted Salvatore, forcing the envelope into her hands. "It's about certain consequences that can arise for those who don't know their place in society." The envelope burned between Rosa's fingers like iron in the fire. She knew, without needing to open it, that it contained veiled threats wrapped in polite language. "Important people are getting irritated with certain situations," continued Salvatore, approaching closer. Rosa could smell the sour wine on his breath. "And when important people get irritated, sometimes bad things happen. Accidents, misunderstandings, small tragedies that could be avoided." "Are you threatening me?" asked Rosa, finding courage in a fury that grew in her chest like high tide. "Me?" Salvatore feigned exaggerated surprise. "I'm just a messenger, Signorina, but if I were you I would read that letter very carefully, and think very well before continuing to frequent places where I'm not welcome." He moved away like a snake slithering back to its hole, leaving Rosa alone in the middle of the square, with the envelope trembling in her hands. Around her, market life continued, vendors shouting their prices, children running between stalls, women negotiating with energy. But Rosa felt isolated in a bubble of silent terror. That night, in her small room above the bakery where she lived, Rosa opened the envelope by the light of a flickering candle. The words, written in elegant calligraphy, were polished like a sharp blade. "Dear Signorina Benedetti, certain friendships, however innocent they may seem, can have unexpected consequences for people of humble origins. The world of aristocracy possesses ancient rules that do not forgive infractions, especially when they involve matters of the heart. It would be prudent to recognize that some paths lead only to pain and destruction. A simple heart can easily break when confronted with realities that are beyond its understanding. Friendly advice: find your happiness in circles more appropriate to your position, before others make decisions for you. With best regards, a concerned friend." Rosa read the letter 3 times before allowing the tears to finally come. They weren't tears of fear, but of anger. Anger at the cruelty of a world that punished love simply for crossing imaginary lines drawn by birth. But even while crying, a part of her soul, the same part that had refused to break when Julia died, murmured a truth that would echo in her dreams. True love is not intimidated by threats, no matter how elegantly they are expressed. The question that kept her awake until dawn was simple and terrible. Was it worth risking not only her own heart, but perhaps her own life, for a love that the whole world seemed determined to destroy? Dawn brought with it dark clouds that accumulated over the Gulf of Naples like a storm's omen. Rosa remained in her room, observing through the small window the first raindrops that began to mark the street stones with grey tears. For the first time since she had begun frequenting the Capodimonte stables, she did not go to the morning meeting with Francesco. The threat letter remained on her small table, its words echoing in her mind like ghost voices. In the palace stables, Francesco waited an hour beyond the usual time. Tuono seemed restless, galloping nervously in his stall as if he felt Rosa's absence in his very being. The prince tried to calm the horse, but his own hands trembled with growing anxiety. "Where is she, Marco?" he asked his faithful servant, who observed the scene with concern. "I don't know, Your Highness. Perhaps the rain—" "Rosa wouldn't miss because of rain," interrupted Francesco, knowing her better than he admitted to himself. Something happened. Unrest consumed him throughout the day. He tried to concentrate on court affairs, on the political meetings his position demanded, but his thoughts constantly flew to Rosa. When the second day passed without news from her, Francesco made a decision that would scandalize the court if they knew. He would personally go out to look for her. At dusk, accompanied only by Marco and 2 discreet guards, Francesco traveled through the popular neighborhoods of Naples. It was the first time he walked through those narrow streets where poverty mixed with dignity, where barefoot children played alongside women who worked from dawn to survive. The difference between his world and Rosa's had never seemed so glaring. The simple houses, the patched clothes drying in windows, the faces marked by hard work, all this created a painful contrast with Capodimonte's luxury. Finally, he found her at the tavern, where she had managed to get work as a kitchen assistant. Rosa was serving tables, her simple dress protected by a stained apron, her hair tied in a practical bun. When their eyes met through the smoke and noise of the tavern, Francesco felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. There was something different about Rosa, a new sadness, deeper, that went beyond mourning for Julia. It was as if a light had been extinguished inside her. "Rosa," he said, approaching her table, "why didn't you come to the stables?" She averted her gaze, pretending to be busy cleaning the already clean table. "Your Highness shouldn't be here," she whispered. "It's not appropriate." The words fell between them like cold blades. Francesco felt fury grow in his chest, not against Rosa, but against the world that had forced her to use that formal and distant language. "Look at me," he asked, his voice laden with contained emotion. When Rosa finally raised her eyes, Francesco saw in them a fear that wasn't there before. Someone had threatened her. Someone had hurt her. "What did they do to you?" he asked, his voice low but intense. "Nothing that wasn't enlightening," responded Rosa, each word costing her visible effort. The silence between them was filled by the tavern's noises, conversations, laughter, the clinking of glasses. But for Francesco and Rosa, the world had been reduced to that small space where two souls were tearing apart in silence. "Rosa, whatever they said or did, I can protect you," said Francesco, extending his hand toward hers. But Rosa backed away, as if the touch could burn her. "Can you?" she asked, and there was new bitterness in her voice. "Can you change the fact that I'm a plebeian? Can you make the differences between us disappear? Can you prevent your family, your friends, the entire court from seeing in me only an opportunist who took advantage of your kindness?" Each question was a sure arrow to Francesco's heart. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words refused to come. Because the painful truth was that, despite all his power, there were forces in society that not even a prince could easily combat. "I need to work," said Rosa finally, moving away. "And you need to return to your world." Francesco remained standing, watching her move away as if he were losing a part of himself. Wounded pride battled with love in his chest, and for a terrible moment, pride won. He turned abruptly and left the tavern, his steps echoing on the wet stones of the street. But before entering the carriage that awaited him, he looked back one last time. Rosa was at the window watching him leave, her hands pressed against the glass as if trying to touch the impossible. That night, both lay down in different worlds, carrying the same pain, the terrible certainty that love, no matter how true it may be, sometimes is not enough to overcome the walls that the world builds between hearts. The days dragged like open wounds for both Francesco and Rosa. The prince wandered through Capodimonte's corridors like a wandering soul, his previously romantic melancholy transforming into a bitterness that worried even the oldest servants. Tuono, feeling Rosa's absence, refused to eat properly and reacted violently to any approach attempt. Francesco tried to resume his old routines, council meetings, diplomatic dinners, hunts with other nobles. But everything tasted like ashes to him. The life that before Rosa's arrival seemed simply melancholic now revealed itself completely empty. It was on a Tuesday morning, when June's sun bathed Naples in an almost brutal golden light, that Duchess Elisabetta Torriani appeared in his quarters, accompanied by her father, Duke Torriani, and the Marquess of Castiglione. "Francesco," said Elisabetta, her voice melodious but laden with determination, "we need to talk about our future." The prince, who was writing at his desk a letter to Pietro that would never be sent, raised his eyes with a tired expression. The habit of writing to his dead brother had returned with full force after the separation from Rosa, as if her loss had reopened wounds that were beginning to heal. "We have no future, Elisabetta," he said simply, returning to the letter. "I've made that clear multiple times." Duke Torriani, a corpulent man whose graying beard did not disguise the hardness of his character, stepped forward. "Prince Francesco," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "I spoke with His Majesty yesterday. The king is concerned with certain attitudes of yours that have generated inappropriate comments at court." Francesco dropped his pen and turned completely to face the visitors. There was something in the three's posture that told him this was not a social visit. "What kind of comments?" he asked, although he already knew the answer. "Comments about your inappropriate proximity with a young woman of humble origin," said the Marquis of Castiglione, his words precise as a scalpel. Comments that stain not only your reputation, but the dignity of the entire royal house. Elisabetta approached the desk, her green eyes shining with a mixture of determination and something that could have been love, if it weren't so possessive. Francesco, I understand that you may have felt confused after Pietro's death, she said, her voice softening in an imitation of understanding. But now it's time to assume your responsibilities. Our engagement was officially announced yesterday by the king. The ceremony will be in autumn. The words fell on Francesco like a frozen avalanche. He rose slowly, his imposing height making the visitors involuntarily step back. You announced my engagement without my consent? He asked, his voice dangerously low. The consent was already given years ago when our parents made the agreement, responded Duke Torriani. You were a child, it's true, but now you're an adult man with duties to your family and your kingdom. Francesco looked at each of the three faces before him, recognizing in them the implacable face of a society that crushed individual feelings in the name of ancestral traditions. And if I refuse? He asked. The silence that followed was laden with unspoken threats. Finally, the Marquis of Castiglione smiled, a cold smile like a dagger's blade. It would be a shame, he said slowly, if certain negative influences in your life suffered unexpected consequences. Sometimes people of humble origin get involved in dangerous situations. Accidents happen, especially with young women who venture where they shouldn't. The threat to Rosa was clear as crystal, although never mentioned directly. Francesco felt his blood freeze in his veins, understanding he was being blackmailed in the vilest possible way. You wouldn't dare, he said, but his voice lacked the necessary conviction. We protect what is ours, Francesco, said Elisabetta softly. And you are ours. You always have been. She approached him, her hand gently touching his arm in a caress that seemed to burn like hot iron. Marry me for love, for duty, or for obligation, she whispered. But marry. It's your destiny. And destinies cannot be altered by passing whims. The three withdrew, leaving Francesco alone with the crushing weight of an impossible choice, his happiness or Rosa's safety. Slowly he sat again at the desk and picked up the pen, but instead of continuing the letter to Pietro, he began a new sheet. My dear Rosa. The words formed themselves, carrying all the love and all the pain of a heart that was tearing apart in order to protect what it loved most. Because sometimes truly loving means giving up one's own happiness to preserve the beloved person. And Francesco, Prince of Naples, discovered that true love could be simultaneously the most beautiful and most painful experience of human life. 3 weeks passed in silent agony. Francesco mechanically fulfilled his princely duties, received ambassadors, participated in ceremonies, signed documents. But it was as if an essential part of his soul had been amputated. The preparations for his engagement to Elisabetta proceeded around him like a tornado, of which he was simultaneously center and victim. Rosa, in turn, worked at Salvatore Mancuso's tavern with iron determination, as if she could drown her pain in incessant activity. Her days began before dawn and ended long after sunset, serving tables, cleaning dishes, sweeping floors, anything that kept her hands busy and her mind away from Capodimonte's stables. But at night, alone in her small room, she allowed the tears to come. She cried not only for Francesco but for the death of a dream that had been too beautiful for her simple world. It was on a Thursday afternoon, when Rosa swept the tavern entrance, that Marco appeared in simple civilian clothes. Francesco's faithful servant looked around nervously before approaching. Signorina Rosa, he said quietly, I have something for you. Rosa felt her heart accelerate, but forced her expression to remain neutral. I cannot accept anything, she said, continuing to sweep. It's just a letter, insisted Marco, removing from his pocket an envelope sealed with Francesco's personal seal, not the official one of the Monteverde house. He hasn't slept for days. He doesn't eat. He's wasting away like a plant without sun. Marco's words pierced the defenses that Rosa had built around her heart. She stopped sweeping and looked at the envelope as if it were a dangerous snake. He's going to marry in autumn, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. He was forced, responded Marco, approaching closer. They threatened to hurt you if he refused. The prince prefers his own suffering to your danger. Rosa felt her legs weaken, so Francesco hadn't abandoned her by his own choice. He was sacrificing himself to protect her. "Take the letter," said Marco urgently. "At least know the truth before giving up completely." With trembling hands, Rosa took the envelope. The paper was of the best quality, but she could feel through it the tears that had stained the ink while Francesco wrote. That night, by the light of the candle that illuminated her modest room, Rosa opened the letter. Francesco's elegant calligraphy danced on the pages like visual music. "My beloved Rosa, I write you this letter knowing it may be the last communication between us, and for this reason I need you to understand the complete truth. I did not abandon you by choice. I have not stopped loving you for even a second since you moved away from me. Each dawn without your presence in the stables is like a small death that repeats infinitely. They threatened to hurt you if I refused the arranged marriage. They said that people of your origin are fragile, that accidents happen easily. I cannot live knowing that my happiness would cost your safety. But there is something I need to propose to you, something that may seem like madness, but is the only hope I have left. At the grand ball of St. John, which will take place tomorrow night at the palace, I will publicly announce my love for you. I no longer care about conventions, titles, or consequences. If true love is not worth fighting for, then nothing is. Come to the ball, Rosa. Wear the dress I will have delivered along with this letter. It's a gift that belonged to my mother, the only woman my father truly loved, despite all political pressures. If you come, I'll know you're willing to face the world by my side. If you don't come, I'll understand that our happiness isn't worth the risks we would have to take. But know that, whatever your decision, you will always be the only woman who brought light back to my heart after years of winter. With all my eternal love, Francesco. P.S. Tuono still refuses to eat properly. He misses you as much as I do. Rosa read the letter 3 times, each word engraving itself in her heart like fire on metal. There was a package that Marco had left along with the letter, and when she opened it, it revealed the most beautiful dress she had ever seen. Sky blue silk embroidered with silver threads, simple but elegant, clearly made for a woman of regal posture, but refined tastes. Along with the dress there was a small card. For the woman who conquered the heart, I thought I had lost forever. With love, from Princess Isabella, Francesco's mother. Rosa sat on the bed, the dress spread around her like a blue cloud. A decision awaited her, a decision that would change not only her life, but possibly the entire social structure that separated them. For the first time since receiving the threats, Rosa smiled, because she understood that some battles are worth fighting, especially when fighting for true love. The Grand Ball of St. John would be the stage for a silent revolution, where a poor orphan and a melancholic prince would challenge centuries of tradition in the name of a feeling that knows no boundaries of class or birth. The night of St. John transformed the Palace of Capodimonte into a terrestrial constellation. Thousands of candles illuminated the main halls, their reflections dancing in Venetian mirrors and on the polished surfaces of marble. The perfume of roses and jasmines mingled with the aroma of fine wines and oriental spices, creating an atmosphere of luxury that bordered on the divine. Rosa remained hidden in the gardens during the first hour of the ball, observing through the illuminated windows the Neapolitan elite in all their magnificence. Ladies in silk and taffeta dresses circulated like colorful butterflies, their diamonds capturing and reflecting the candlelight in thousands of small rainbows. Princess Isabella's dress fitted perfectly to her body, as if it had been made especially for her. Rosa had styled her hair in an elegant bun that Giulia would have loved, leaving some loose strands to frame her face. For the first time in her life, she felt truly beautiful. But the exterior beauty did not diminish the terror she felt, imagining herself entering that world of privileges, where each person present knew exactly who she was and where she came from. Francesco circulated through the main hall like an actor playing a role he despised. Dressed in a navy blue gala uniform embroidered in gold, he greeted guests, danced with nobility ladies, and smiled when necessary. But his eyes constantly scanned the crowd looking for a specific figure. Elisabetta remained by his side, like a possessive shadow, dazzling in a blood-red dress that enhanced her cold beauty. She had noticed Francesco's restlessness and correctly attributed it to hope that his plebeian obsession would appear to cause a scandal she was prepared to crush. "You're distracted tonight," commented Elisabetta, her hand resting on Francesco's arm as they watched the couples dancing. "Expecting someone?" Francesco looked at her with a neutral expression. "Just fulfilling my social duties," he responded diplomatically. "How good," smiled Elisabetta, "because I have wonderful news." Papa accelerated the wedding preparations. It will be next week, not in autumn. He believes that certain temptations become weaker when we eliminate opportunities for them to flourish. The words fell on Francesco like a frozen axe. 1 week. He had only 1 week of freedom left before becoming a perpetual prisoner of a loveless marriage. It was at that moment that Rosa finally found courage to enter the palace. The murmur that rose when she appeared at the top of the main staircase was like waves breaking on rocks. Conversations ceased, fans fluttered nervously, and all eyes turned to the unknown young woman whose presence radiated a natural dignity that no aristocratic education could teach. Francesco felt as if the entire world had stopped. Rosa was there, more beautiful than he had ever seen her, descending the marble stairs with the natural grace of a princess. His mother's dress transformed her without disguising her authentic essence. "Who is that woman?" whispered someone in the crowd. "I've never seen her at court," commented another. "Where did she come from?" Francesco walked toward the staircase, making his way through the crowd that parted like the sea opening. His blue eyes were fixed on Rosa's brown ones, in a silent communication that excluded all other presence. Elisabetta followed him, her green eyes narrowing when she recognized the young woman she had threatened weeks before. Her hand closed on her ivory fan with enough force to almost break it. When Francesco extended his hand to Rosa at the foot of the staircase, the gesture was seen by all present. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. It was a public declaration that the Prince of Naples had chosen his heart over his obligations. "Rosa," he said, his voice laden with emotion that echoed in the absolute silence of the hall. "You came." "I came," she responded simply, placing her hand in his. The touch sent waves of energy between them, sealing a silent pact before 300 scandalized people. Francesco led Rosa to the center of the hall, where the musicians had stopped playing and awaited instructions. "Play," ordered Francesco, his voice clear and authoritative. "The most beautiful waltz you know." The first notes of a Strauss waltz filled the air like celestial blessing. Francesco enveloped Rosa in his arms, and they began to dance as if they were the only beings existing in the universe. The crowd watched, fascinated and horrified. They had never witnessed such a break in protocol, such an open challenge to social conventions. But there was something in the way Francesco and Rosa danced, with love so pure and evident that it transcended class differences, that touched even the most hardened hearts. "This is an intolerable scandal," shouted Elisabetta, but her voice was lost in the waltz melody and the crowd's murmurs. Francesco did not take his eyes off Rosa during the entire dance. When the music ended, he knelt in the center of the hall before all the guests and removed from his pocket a ring that had belonged to his mother. "Rosa Benedeti," he said, his voice echoing in the hall's vaults, "will you accept to be my wife?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the candles seemed to stop flickering. Rosa looked around, seeing shocked faces, some indignant, others curious, a few moved by the courage of true love. "I accept," she said, and her voice, though low, was heard by all. Francesco slipped the ring onto her finger, an emerald ring that symbolized not only an engagement, but a silent revolution that would forever change the history of that princely family. The kiss that sealed the commitment was witnessed by Naples' elite, creating a moment that would be remembered and whispered for generations. Love had triumphed publicly, but Rosa and Francesco knew the real battle was just beginning. The uproar that followed the public engagement was like a tropical storm. Elisabetta fainted dramatically, being carried by servants who seemed more relieved to have an excuse to leave the hall than concerned about her well-being. Duke Torriani and the Marquess of Castiglione whispered furiously among themselves, their faces red with indignation. But Francesco kept Rosa by his side, facing the censorious looks and scandalized exclamations with a serenity that surprised even himself. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive, as if he had awakened from a nightmare that had lasted since Pietro's death. "Let's get out of here," he whispered in Rosa's ear, who remained dignifiedly silent despite the storm of emotions around them. They walked hand in hand through the crowd that opened at their passage like a theatrical curtain. Some guests observed them with evident disapproval, others with poorly disguised curiosity, and a few, especially the younger ladies, with something that seemed like romantic admiration. When passing by Duchess Elisabetta, who had recovered consciousness with suspicious speed, Francesco stopped briefly. "Elisabetta," he said, his voice laden with cold courtesy, "I present my fiancée Rosa Benedeti. I hope you can become friends." Elisabetta looked at Rosa with hatred so pure it seemed to burn the air between them. "This is not over," she hissed through her teeth, but her threat was lost when Francesco and Rosa continued walking, without giving importance to her words. They left the palace through the gardens, where the perfume of night jasmines enveloped them like a perfumed mantle. The full moon poured silver light over the pergolas covered with wisteria, creating a scene of ethereal beauty that contrasted dramatically with the tension they had left behind. "Are you sure of what you did?" asked Rosa, when they were finally alone under a pergola of climbing roses. "You challenged all Neapolitan aristocracy for my sake." Francesco took her face between his hands, his thumbs gently caressing her cheeks. "I'm sure I cannot live without you," he responded. "I'm sure I prefer to face the entire world by your side than to have all society's approval without your love. But your family, your position," began Rosa. "My position is worth nothing if I cannot use it to protect whom I love," interrupted Francesco. "And as for my family, Pietro taught me something before dying, even without knowing. Life is too short to waste on conventions that make us unhappy." The kiss that followed was different from all others. It tasted of freedom, of decisions made and possible futures. Rosa felt herself melting in Francesco's arms, all her worries temporarily dissolving in the heat of that moment. "What will we do now?" she asked when they separated. Francesco smiled, and Rosa realized it was the first time she had seen a truly happy smile on his lips. "Now we go to my villa in the hills," he said. "It's a property I inherited from my mother, far from court and palatial intrigues. There we can be just Francesco and Rosa without titles or social pressures. And Tuono? Tuono comes with us," laughed Francesco. "He needs you as much as I do." They walked through the gardens toward the private stables, where Marco had already prepared a simple carriage and 2 horses for the journey. The faithful servant smiled like a proud father, happy to see his young master finally choosing happiness. "The signorina's luggage is already in the carriage," informed Marco, "and Tuono has been prepared for the journey." "How did you know she would come?" asked Francesco, amazed by his servant's efficiency. "Because those who truly love always find courage to fight for love," responded Marco simply. When they left through the palace's secondary gates, Rosa looked back one last time. She could still see the ball's lights twinkling in the windows, hear the distant echo of music and conversations. It was as if she were leaving behind not only a place, but an old version of herself. "Regretful?" asked Francesco, following her gaze. "No," responded Rosa, with surprising conviction. "I'm afraid but not regretful. Sometimes fear is just the other face of courage." As the carriage moved away through the Neapolitan hills under the full moon's light, Tuono galloped alongside, free as the wind that swept the countryside. It was as if the universe itself conspired to bless that romantic escape that had begun as scandal and transformed into hope. Love had won the first battle, but Rosa and Francesco knew they would have to prove day after day that some traditions deserve to be broken when it comes to defending the authenticity of human feelings. Villa Monteverde rose in the hills like a hidden jewel among centennial olive trees and vineyards that extended as far as the eye could see. Built in the previous century by Francesco's mother, it was smaller than the main palace, but infinitely more welcoming, with its light stone walls warmed by the Mediterranean sun and gardens that seemed to have grown spontaneously from the generous earth. Rosa woke on her first morning at the villa to the song of nightingales entering through the open window. The room Francesco had offered her was situated on the 2nd floor, with a view of the gardens where Tuono grazed freely among wildflowers. It was like awakening in a dream that had become reality. During the following weeks, they established a routine that seemed taken from a peasant fairy tale. Francesco had exchanged his princely attire for simple linen and cotton clothes, working alongside Rosa in the stables he had built especially for Tuono. She taught him the secrets she knew about horses, while he shared with her his classical education, reading her poetry during golden summer afternoons. The nights were dedicated to conversations that extended until dawn, when they discovered in each other layers of personality that palatial protocol had never allowed them to reveal. Francesco spoke of his youthful dreams before the weight of princely responsibilities curved his shoulders. Rosa shared memories of Giulia, and for the first time since her sister's death, she could smile when remembering her without the pain being unbearable. "You brought Pietro back to me," said Francesco one of those nights, while they observed the stars from the stone veranda that overlooked the valley. Not Pietro himself, but the ability to remember him with joy instead of just guilt. Rosa was nestled in his arms, her head resting on his shoulder, while the perfume of wild lavender rose from the gardens. "And you gave me Giulia back in a different way," she responded softly. "When I tell you about her mischief, when I see you smile at the stories we shared, it's as if she were still alive through our memories." They had learned that true love does not erase the pain of loss, but transforms it into something bearable, even beautiful, when shared with someone who understands that we all carry beloved ghosts in our hearts. The outside world seemed distant at the villa, but not non-existent. Marco brought occasional news from court. Elisabetta had married precipitously to a Roman count, in a union everyone knew was strategic to save her wounded dignity. The king had initially been furious with Francesco's desertion, but political pressures from other matters eventually diminished his concern with the romantic scandal. "Time heals many wounds," Marco said philosophically, "and society has short memory for scandals when new ones arise to occupy their attention." It was on an August morning, when late roses still bloomed in the gardens, that Francesco made a proposal that would definitively change their lives. "Marry me today," he said, while they brushed Tuono together in the stables, not in a grandiose ceremony to impress society, but in a simple ceremony in the villa's chapel, just for us. Rosa stopped brushing and looked at him with surprise. "Today? Why wait longer?" asked Francesco, his blue eyes shining with a happiness Rosa had never imagined possible. "We already know we want to spend the rest of our lives together. We've already faced the worst obstacles the world can place in our path. What more do we need besides our mutual certainty?" The ceremony took place at sunset, in the small stone chapel that Francesco's mother had built in the villa's gardens. Only Marco and the villa's governess Donna Carmen served as witnesses. There were no elaborate flowers or organ music, only the natural song of birds and the perfume of jasmines that grew wild around the chapel. Rosa wore a simple white linen dress she had embroidered herself during the weeks at the villa, while Francesco wore a white shirt and dark pants, without any insignia of his princely position. The local priest, an elderly man who had known Francesco since childhood, conducted the ceremony with touching simplicity. When the moment for vows came, Francesco and Rosa looked into each other's eyes and spoke words that came directly from the heart. "I promise to love you not despite our differences but because of them," said Francesco. "I promise to be your companion in all seasons of life, your strength in moments of weakness, your comfort in moments of pain. I promise to be your partner in building a love that defies conventions," responded Rosa. "I promise that my humble origin will never make me forget that true love knows no boundaries of birth or social class." The kiss that sealed their union was witnessed by the golden sun setting over the Neapolitan hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that rivaled the beauty of any cathedral. That night, for the first time, they slept as husband and wife in the villa's main room, where portraits of Francesco's ancestors looked benevolently upon the union that had broken all rules but proved that genuine love transcends any social barrier. When the following dawn broke over the hills, bringing with it the perfume of a new season and new possibilities, Tuono whinnied joyfully in the gardens, as if celebrating the fact that his family had finally become complete. Francesco and Rosa had discovered that true nobility does not reside in titles or birth, but in the courage to follow the heart, even when the entire world tries to convince us otherwise. And so, the melancholic prince and the orphaned horse trainer proved that some love stories are too strong to be destroyed by social conventions. writing with their own lives a tale that would be whispered for generations as proof that true love always finds a way.